Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to All Things Division 3 Soccer with SimpleCoach and Jackie. I am SimpleCoach, and right there, hanging out, hot day, is Jackie. Well, decided to do an episode of Injured Time. Why? Because so much is going on in the world of soccer that I figured I would opine and, get my thoughts out there. Not that I think anything is really particularly interesting. I'm finding the Copa America and the Euros to be borderline unwatchable. Some good games here and there. But I just find I find the Euros to be very tired. I don't know if that's the right word, but I just don't, whether it's the players or just the Euros just don't have this energy that I thought they would have, as much as they're trying to, pump it up. And then Copa America, what are you going to say about the U.S.? Which is the genesis of this Injured Time, right? It shouldn't be long, so I'm hoping to run through. Just got a couple points I wanted to make and move on. The bottom line is like everybody except for maybe the Berhalters. I've come to the conclusion, that the disappointment of the men's team is in Copa America requires some action, which we haven't gotten any action, any comment, nothing from the Federation, which to me is a dereliction of duty, but whatever, that's just my style. I would be out, whoever is responsible, shoulder it, get in front of the cameras and talk, and, but whatever, that's not what they do. But I will say, it's not so much of getting knocked out. I think I'm okay with getting knocked out. I'm just it's how we play or our style, obvious lack of success, or both, or maybe it's something entirely else. Like, I'm not, contrary to popular opinion, I don't particularly think this is a golden generation. I don't particularly think, outside of Christian Pulisic, maybe. I don't think we have some super great talent on the field. I think we're just sort of like, ironically enough, the quintessential American team that, our technical ability or tactical ability is subpar. But, I'm surprised at how all of that has sort of led to the fans generally turning against the team. And when I say fans turning against the team, I generally mean those of us who dwell in Exeter, right? But I do think, look, something needs to happen. And so the first thing I'll just come out right and say, I think this is the thing that most coaches do, right? Like, you don't find success, you resign. So I give him the benefit of the doubt, but I think Greg Berhalter needs to move on, or he needs to be moved on, right? I don't think that's needs to be said. I don't think it's a surprise that it's been uninspiring for a while now, and then the whole the whole stuff that went on where he stepped away from the team, and just the uninspiring way they played. I just don't want to dwell on it, because to me it's as self-evident as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? Like, I just don't. Even though watching Panama, I don't think was an exercise in the pursuit of happiness, that's for sure. But to me, it's just pretty obvious. So I'm just going to leave it at that. And the only thing I think anyone who is focused on Greg Berhalter's status as the national team coach. I think that's everybody. I think everything is stopped, and I think U.S. fans, that's all they're waiting for. What's the status? To me, there are bigger issues. There's much bigger issues that this is just a symptom of those bigger issues. And so, while some of us are focused on the national team coach, some of us are, think, hey, we've hit an iceberg a long time ago. The band is playing on the deck. The captain is nowhere to be found. And, something needs to happen. So maybe this is the first step. But I will say, I'm afraid, as we always do, we make these dramatic changes and then we expect some monumental change. And I'm actually with Tab Ramos on this, who in an interview with Soccer America, asked what type of coach should the U.S. bring in if Berhalter steps away. And it's still a big if, but if they were to look for a new coach, and the basic premise of his comments were, it should be a coach for 18 months. So who is going to bring the most success in the shortest period of time for the World Cup? And that's the sole focus. This isn't about rewriting, rebuilding, redoing. This is about, how do we take this team, inspire it, make it inspirational, and take it to the World Cup and have some success there. That's the extent of the role this person should have. We don't need like I said, no grand strategist. They basically need to take a roster. Again, this is probably unpopular opinion, but a roster that's largely made up of role players. They're supporting casts for their clubs for the most part. And how do you get those guys competitive and to inspire fans? I would actually argue that the task ahead of this coach for 18 months might be more difficult than they were in, I won't go dare to say 1990 Italy, but definitely 94. That was kind of a challenge, is how do you even make the second round? I don't think people remember that it wasn't a given that the U.S. is going to qualify for the second round. So, this is quite a big deal. So, and I don't think this is the only issue that needs to be addressed. Who's the coach? I don't think solves any of the systemic problems that I think are leading us down a path to mediocrity, to be quite honest with you. Truth be told, I don't think this is a men's issue. I think this is a men's issue. It's a women's issue. It's a youth issue. Where up and down the ladder, for the most part, it's just uninspiring, average dullness. There. So as part of this, I figured, if we're going to chunk this out, what are the things? What are a couple things that I think we need to do as this 18-monther is going through the cycle to the World Cup? What are some of the things that we need to be thinking about? And this one is a big one for me, and I know it's frowned upon by a lot of folks, and I think the implication is that there's, it's xenophobic or what have you, but it's not. I'm just looking out for what's best for U.S. soccer. So I do think we need to ask ourselves, and we need to take a look at our domestic leagues, in particular MLS, obviously. And not that I think the Federation can do it, because the Federation is not a regulatory body. But I think we need to figure out a way to require a fixed number of players who are eligible for the U.S. national team to be on the field at any given point in a league match if they're in MLS. Because frankly, right now, we don't have that, right? There are games where there is no eligible U.S. national team player on the field for either team. I think that's troubling. I think I have this thesis that goes back that I think that's where I think some of our problems are rooted in. largely because I don't think, again, exceptions aside, it's not like the best of our players are going over to Europe or wherever they go and they're suddenly playing on these elite teams doing all those things. Again, there's Christian Pulisic and Weston McKennie, who, again, just sort of wonder about. But like, they're not these dominating players on their club teams, right? And so we don't have that. We have, yeah, they're in a great atmosphere and all that stuff, but they're they're more one. There's more players like them over there than there are in MLS, and so sometimes it's okay to be a big fish in a little pond. And he may have been better, but I think anyone who looks at Landon Donovan can say he had a really successful national team career, and he stayed in the United States. So, and I'm sure there's other players. I haven't gone down that, but this has been happening for a while, right? Like, I think if the role of the U.S. player, by and large, has diminished. And while roster sizes have almost doubled since 1996, I think they're around 45 spots now. It started in 1996 with 22 players on the roster. At the start, it was an American league and by design, and close to 70% of players on a roster were U.S. players. Right? And at some point, a decision was made, right? And I'm speaking MLS in particular, and that number has dropped, the percentage of eligible players. And so, yeah, it's always been the same. 15, 16 players in an MLS roster are U.S. based, but the roster has expanded to the point where their roles diminished, and that's good, bad. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just saying, like, if we need our guys to be better, maybe we need to do things to give opportunity to those players. And I get the whole competitive, you should compete for the spot and all that stuff. But if we're not doing it, and this is the result, then we're going to have a lot more of this. And I think the other thing, and it's just a theory, and like I said, it's a little bit more, but anecdotally, and it's not scientific, it's just anecdotally, CONCACAF, for as much grief as has gotten better over the last 10 to 15 years than it was in the past. It's gotten more competitive. It's more difficult for the U.S. to travel abroad, right? And I think that's because those players in those countries have been a direct beneficiary of having a professional league like MLS willing to bring them to the United States to play, give them the playing time, give them the starting roles. Again, I think is self-evident, and then I'll go back to something that you're probably like, what does this have to do with the U.S. national team? And I go back to when Jurgen Klinsmann was hired, we were told that one of our problems, because he was really big into telling us what our issues were, was that we needed to have players play more meaningful games. And so that kicked off this process, development of the Development Academy. I'll just say it. And since then our players have gotten more blah, right? Like, every ounce of creativity and is just purged from them, and they end up being, for all intents and purposes, robots, which is what I see when I watch the men's team right now. And the worst part, and I think I go back and some of this, we bought into his gospel of what's wrong, right? He talked about the upside down pyramid, how college, high school soccer was counterproductive to the game. And I pulled out an article, right? All of that, the whole system was insufficiently effective in the wake of recent stagnation and underachievement in international competition. This is 2011. So that's 13, 14 years ago. And here we are. And the sad truth is our pipeline of players is going to be more of the same for the foreseeable future. Part of it is by our own choice. Part of it is neglecting some players that I think you all know with the U.S. Olympic team roster. Right? I think they lack the technical and the tactical growth that we tried to fix 14 years ago. And maybe we were better off to just keep doing what we were doing. Maybe it's time again to reconsider our entire development process. What is our objective? And that's pretty dramatic coming from someone who thinks, ripping out and replacing stuff leads to disastrous unintended consequences, and which I think we did back 15 years ago and where we're at now. And just because I'm on a rant and just because I'm, feeling it, and I'll add one for a kicker that I think goes way beyond the idea of just hiring somebody. What good does that do, right? Like, and this, I'm going to give this as my nod to my pro rel for USA friends. I think it's time to strengthen the individual state associations by returning all league play to the states. It might sound like heresy, but in youth soccer, where this all begins, I think you need the state federations, state leagues to be created and start with some, yes, promotion and relegation model, and where the state cup is the pinnacle of non-league play. As of right now, we have placed competition over doing the hard work of developing players. I'm sure I'll get something that says, "Oh no, we do this, that, and the other one's great." I get it. But to me, the proof is in the pudding. And where are we? What have we created? I just don't think we've sort of moved the ball forward from a tactical standpoint. What to just tie this back? What does it have to do with the national team mediocrity, both the men and the women? I just don't think replacing a coach is going to do anything except for the immediacy that we're looking at as fans, or even the Emma Hayes with the women's team. I don't think it resolves issues. I don't think our players will magically get better. I think our teams will get better and will function better, and will be able to go into games a little bit better. But those players do not get better. They are who they are at this point. And I think that there are some questions that are real core. And again, you talk to any fan, you could rattle it off, right? That just come to us that we have as a soccer nation that I think we need to really sort of include in this discussion, right? Because things have gone, I'd argue, relatively mediocrely over the last 15 years, if that. If not gotten worse. Is that possible? I don't know. And that's with guys who have all the potential, you would think. And I think this is one of the core issues. I just think how the process by which we develop and what the burdens we place on players that are on things that are outside of what is on the soccer field, I think is very troubling. Picking it again, I believe in capitalism, but the idea that signing up for a team for $3,000, but then also know that you have to travel halfway around the country to these tournaments because that's where we think, these competitive games are going to be is absolutely ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. I'm sorry. If you're going to travel halfway to the country, make it a vacation, not a soccer tournament or thing. So, and again, I just mentioned, I think, forget who's hired now. To me, it's all about the Olympic squad that's just been released. We're 17 of 18. 17 of 18 players are MLS-based players. I'm very intrigued by that. What does that look like? And I'm not saying it's because they're MLS versus European players, but it's because they supposedly have roles in MLS, and is it significant enough to have an impact in the Olympics, which I think is going to be a lot more competitive than what people realize. But what do I know? And then last but not least, I watched this morning and sort of triggered my thoughts about doing this injured time. Rob Stone on the Bill Simmons podcast. I posted this pod on d3soccer.fans. You can find it injured time. What's next for the U.S. soccer. There's a link to the Bill Simmons podcast where Rob Stone talks about, and he talks about a lot of things we don't want to necessarily hear, but I think is a pretty clear view into these things where some of us think are much more fundamental issues that we need to address that just by hiring a coach doesn't fix. So with that, I'm just going to let it ride. Thanks for all your support. I have another video coming out. I'm going back to the roots, talking about Division III soccer, where I'll be talking about some part 2 of some of the neat things I think are in store for 2024 and what we could expect. So thank you for all the support, comments, compliments, complaints, craziness. Comment down below. Shoot me an email. I respond. Surprise. And thank you very much, and hope to do this again soon. Talk soon. Bye.